The beginning of the testing of the next generation was both amazing and terrifying. When we learned that Jewel was pregnant, I started praying for her and the baby, and those prayers were needed. The first thing we did was make sure the two of them got married. I called over Norman and had a conversation. He was excited, but felt the same way, that the two of them needed to be married before the eyes of God. So we spoke to Warren, and he was in full agreement. And he and Jewel wanted to, so we called one of the local pastors. Warren got a ring and they got married, and Jewel moved into the house. Then the crazy stuff started with Jewel. At first it was dreams that she was going to have a miscarriage. She would wake up in the middle of the night afraid, and this was in the first trimester. These attacks only escalated as the pregnancy progressed, this fear, intense fear and anxiety raging in her. I remember Warren and my wife talking, and he told her that she would spend more time with Jewel. The two of them started talking and hanging out, praying over the baby. This helped, but then something in the woods decided to visit. This was the first time I had ever seen or heard of something like this. Stop, and I want you to know something. These spirits work in teams of two. The spirit of fear opens the door to confusion. I believe that it was this fear that she was constantly being bombarded with that started all of this confusion that happened next. The day this thing came out of the woods, we were all having lunch together, Jewel and her father, me, my wife, my son, and Warren. The days had been going well, then all of a sudden it was like confusion came flying in. Jewel was in the kitchen, and her father was joking with her, and she got offended, saying, "I can never do anything right for you." She got offended, and then he got offended. The two of them started to argue out of the blue, and next thing I knew, Warren was jumping into the mix. I was standing there confused because he was just joking, and then it hits me. This is an attack. So I just start to pray out loud. Lord, I rebuke the spirit of confusion from this household, bind it, and cast it to the dry places according to your word. This I decree and declare in the name of Jesus Christ. It was like they were all broken from a spell because it stops. There is this silence, then it was awkward. This silence was there for a few minutes, and then my son broke it by saying, "I'm hungry. Can I have some chips?" Later that evening, just as the sun was going down, is when this thing came out of the woods. We were all sitting around watching TV. We hear this screaming. It sounds like a woman screaming, and you could feel it. The presence coming from the woods. We get up and go to the back door and go outside, and it sounds like a woman is being murdered. When we looked, it was a woman who looked exactly like Jewel, except she was off. She was pregnant, but her belly was dragging across the ground like she had multiple babies inside her belly. We are standing there looking like, "What the F is this?" And Jewel starts to freak out and hyperventilate and starts to black out. Warren catches her and takes her back inside the house, and her father and I stay outside. I wanted to get the shotgun and kill it, but something told me not to. It was not my place, so I looked over at their father and told him, "You need to rebuke this. It's a physical manifestation of the miscarriage of your grandchild." It was in that moment that Norman starts to walk towards this thing, and you can see that it was surprised. It was almost like it got a memo that it was time for it to show up, and it was late and didn't realize that the environment was not right for its appearance. Because as Norman walks forward, it slows down and starts to look around, like it's not just seeing him, but he is seeing something walking with him. Then Norman says, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ. You will not have my grandchild, and I cast you away to a dry place on another continent. And I bind you from entering any human body or animal body to return. I assign 2 warring angels to chase you and fight you, and I blot out your evil prophecy against my family." I'm not sure if you have ever seen a portal open, but they look like flashes of light. There is a flash of light, and then it closes. It was a crazy encounter, and over the next 6 months, she didn't have anything strange happen. In fact, when the baby came, they named him after his grandfather. That baby was anointed and consecrated to the Lord the minute the blood was wiped from his body, and as soon as he was put in his mother's arms. Things calmed down for a few months, and all was good. Then Gordon was back on deck for trouble. He calls me one night and says that the wolves are on his property again and that he needed help. I'm still not sure why, but they love to mess with Gordon. This time they were just showing themselves to him in the day and night, trying to bring him into fear. Based on the sound of his voice, it was starting to work. When I got there, I asked how long it had been going on, and he told me it was going on 2 weeks, and they have been getting closer and closer. Mind you, it's nighttime. And he and I went outside, with the understanding of what my son disclosed to me, that these things were hearing from wicked spirits. So I tell Gordon, listen, tell them not to listen. He says, to what? I said, this is your property. You have to tell them not to listen to those spirits and bind those evil spirits from traveling onto your property with them. So he says, I bind you wicked spirits from entering this property. Then this is when it got crazy. This was the first and only time I saw these things behave that way. They came out of the woods into the open and showed themselves. It was 12 of them. They stood there where we could see them, and then they turned and walked away. They didn't hide themselves in any way whatsoever. I personally have come to believe that we were going through the process of taking dominion of these woods from the spirits that had been running amok for years, decades, and probably centuries. That is what I felt was happening. I will give you an example of why. A few days later, we are at home, and my son says that a servant wants to show us something in the woods. So we go into the woods, and he is just walking along, and you can hear this grunting and huffing. He looks and says hello, and keeps walking. Then I realize we are being shadowed as we are walking through the woods. He looks at me and says, that is their parents. They are just walking with us, Dad. We keep walking, and they do. And then it stops, and my son says, okay. The servant is saying that we are getting close, and we turn right and start to go up this hill, and remember those ruins I told you about. Well, there are these stones that are there, and I know that this is the place from that vision. My son's servant is telling me this is where it all started and that you need to know it. Then my son walks off and says he sees one of the little wolves and starts talking to the bushes and asks where its parents are. Then I see the bushes move and this giant wolf head comes out, and I'm like, son, move away from that thing. I start to head in that direction, and he reaches out his hand and it licks his. I'm flabbergasted by what I'm seeing. Then it pulls its head back into the bushes, and then my son says, okay, that is all the servant wanted you to see. Let's go home. So we head back home. That was the start of the wolves visiting my property, just looking. Nothing aggressive or crazy. They were just there.
Vibrate before Yahweh Elohim. There is a courtesy that they understand. One of such courtesies is a courtesy of reverence. Another courtesy of standing before a spirit that is holy is the courtesy of honor. Another courtesy is a courtesy of expectation. If your heart is not full of expectation, you will walk past where creatures of glory are walking through, and you will not connect with the energies of Zion. We are ascending the mountains of God. Those are not songs. They are chants of war. They are summons into heights of glory. They are not songs, brothers and sisters. Only men that make it to the top of the mountain will command the armies of God. They are certain that we not make it to the top. Life will not make so much meaning on ground. Hi, hi, hey, hey, ah, ah, hey, hey, ah. So you reign, you ancient Zion's King, Kadosh, Kadosh, you are mighty on your throne. You reign.